The December wind sliced through Manhattan's financial district like a blade, carrying with it the sharp scent of winter and the promise of snow. Along Fifth Avenue, where glass towers pierced the gray sky and luxury boutiques displayed their glittering wares, the afternoon crowd moved with purpose. Designer coats swept past storefront windows, patent leather shoes clicked against frosted sidewalks, and the warm glow of high-end establishments beckoned to those who belonged. Steam rose from manholes like urban geysers, and the city's heartbeat pulsed through every crack in the concrete, relentless and unforgiving. Against this backdrop of wealth and privilege, two figures moved more slowly. Marcus Thompson, a tall black man in his late 30s, walked with measured steps beside his 7-year-old daughter, Lily. His coat, though clean and carefully maintained, bore the wear of many winters, its fabric slightly faded at the cuffs and shoulders. The little girl's backpack, once bright purple but now softened by countless adventures, seemed too large for her small frame. Her mittened hand gripped his fingers tightly as they navigated the river of hurried pedestrians, each step deliberate and careful on the increasingly slippery sidewalk. The temperature had dropped steadily throughout the day, and now, as evening approached, the cold seemed to seep through every layer of clothing, settling into bones with cruel persistence. Lily's breath formed small clouds in the frigid air, and despite her father's attempts to shield her from the worst of the wind, her lips had begun to take on a bluish tinge that spoke of too many hours exposed to winter's merciless embrace. They approached the golden light spilling from Café Lumière, one of the district's most exclusive establishments. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see well-dressed patrons enjoying steaming cups of imported coffee, their faces flushed with warmth and contentment. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across polished marble floors, and the soft murmur of sophisticated conversation drifted through the heavy glass, like a siren's call to those left out in the cold. The warmth radiating through those windows promised refuge from the bitter wind, but as they neared the entrance, two security guards in crisp black uniforms stepped forward. Their movements were deliberate, practiced, designed to create a barrier without the necessity of words. The taller guard, his face set in hard lines that spoke of years spent making snap judgments about human worth, crossed his arms and shook his head slowly. "This establishment maintains certain standards," he announced, his voice carrying across the sidewalk with intentional volume, ensuring that passers-by would hear every carefully chosen word. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable somewhere else. There's a McDonald's 3 blocks down." His partner, shorter but no less intimidating, nodded in agreement, his hand resting casually on the radio clipped to his belt. The gesture was subtle, but unmistakable. A reminder of the power dynamics at play on this expensive stretch of Manhattan real estate. The gathering crowd slowed their pace, sensing drama unfolding like a street performance they hadn't purchased tickets for. Some stopped entirely, phones emerging from designer purses and coat pockets like predators, scenting blood in the water. A woman in a fur coat raised her device, her thumb hovering over the record button with the eager anticipation of someone about to witness a public humiliation. Lily pressed closer to her father's side, her dark eyes wide with confusion and growing fear. She had not yet learned that the world could be so cruel, so quick to judge based on appearances alone. Her small voice, barely audible above the wind, carried the heartbreaking bewilderment of innocence confronted with inexplicable hatred. "Daddy, why can't we go inside? I'm really cold." Marcus remained silent, his jaw tight but his expression carefully controlled. 20 years of corporate boardrooms had taught him the value of composure, even when every instinct screamed for justice. His hand found his daughter's shoulder, a gentle anchor in the storm of whispers and stares that surrounded them like a hostile tide. Behind his calm exterior, memories flickered of boardroom victories, of negotiations worth millions of dollars, of the respect his voice commanded when he spoke in conference rooms lined with leather and mahogany. From across the street, Sarah Mitchell watched the scene unfold with growing discomfort. At 28, she had worked her way up from a small-town background in Ohio to a respectable position at a mid-level consulting firm, navigating the labyrinth of Manhattan ambition with determination and grit. Her own modest coat and sensible shoes marked her as neither wealthy nor poor, simply one of the millions who made their living in the city's endless maze of office buildings and coffee shops. She had been on her way home from a particularly grueling day of client meetings, her mind occupied with quarterly reports and presentation deadlines, when the confrontation at the cafe entrance caught her attention. Something in the little girl's posture, the way she seemed to shrink into herself while clinging to her father's hand, struck Sarah like a physical blow to the chest. The scene triggered memories of her own childhood, of times when her family's modest circumstances had made her feel invisible or unwelcome in certain spaces. She remembered the sting of exclusion, the way shame could settle in your stomach like a cold stone when the world decided you didn't belong. Without fully understanding why, without stopping to consider the potential consequences or complications, she found herself crossing the street. Her heels clicked rapidly against the pavement, the sound sharp and determined in the crystalline air. The crowd parted slightly as she approached, her purposeful stride cutting through their collective voyeurism like a knife through silk. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice clear and steady as she addressed the security guards. "Is there a problem here?" The shorter guard gestured dismissively, his tone suggesting that her question was an unwelcome intrusion into matters that didn't concern her. "Just maintaining our clientele standards, ma'am. Nothing that concerns you. These people need to move along." Sarah's gaze shifted to Lily, whose trembling had nothing to do with excitement and everything to do with cold that seemed to penetrate straight through to her small bones. The child's breath formed small puffs in the frigid air, and her dark eyes held a confusion that no 7-year-old should have to experience. Her father's grip on her hand was protective, reassuring, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself ready for whatever cruelty might come next. Without hesitation, Sarah knelt to the little girl's eye level, her voice soft but audible to all who had gathered to witness this impromptu street theater. "Hey there, sweetheart. Are you cold?" Lily nodded, her lower lip trembling not just from the temperature but from the overwhelming situation she couldn't fully comprehend. Sarah felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest, a maternal instinct she hadn't known she possessed. "Let's get you warm," Sarah said, rising to face the guards with newfound resolve. She turned to Marcus, extending her hand in a gesture of solidarity that transcended the artificial barriers others had tried to construct. "I'm Sarah. Would you and your daughter like to join me for some hot chocolate?" The lead security guard's eyebrows rose in skeptical arcs, his expression suggesting that Sarah had somehow misunderstood the natural order of things. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand the situation here. This is a high-end establishment with particular standards." "I understand perfectly," Sarah interrupted, her journalist's instincts recognizing injustice when she saw it played out in real time. "A child is cold, and there's warmth inside. What exactly is complicated about that?" She took Lily's free hand, the small fingers like ice, even through the worn mittens. "We're going inside." The cafe's interior wrapped around them like a warm embrace, the sudden transition from bitter cold to luxurious comfort almost overwhelming in its intensity. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors polished to mirror brightness, and the rich aroma of imported coffee mingled with the scent of fresh pastries and the subtle perfume of wealthy patrons. Conversations continued in hushed, cultured tones at linen-covered tables. But Sarah was acutely aware of the stares following their unusual trio. The maître d', a thin man with precisely groomed hair and an expression of perpetual disapproval, approached with measured steps. His eyes took in their small group with the practiced assessment of someone trained to sort the worthy from the unworthy in a matter of seconds. "Madam," he began, his accent carrying the affected precision of someone who had worked hard to erase his origins. "I'm afraid all our tables are reserved this evening." Sarah's gaze swept the dining room, noting at least a dozen empty tables gleaming with unused silverware and pristine napkins folded into perfect peaks. "That one looks available," she said, pointing to a corner table, away from the main flow of foot traffic but still within the restaurant's golden glow. Before the maître d' could object further, she guided Marcus and Lily toward the table, her determination brooking no argument. Marcus helped his daughter out of her coat, revealing a sweater that, while clean and carefully mended, had clearly seen better days. Sarah noticed how carefully he folded the small garment, how his movements spoke of a man accustomed to taking care of precious things with limited resources. "Are you hungry, sweetheart?" Sarah asked Lily, whose eyes had grown wide at the elegant surroundings. The little girl's gaze wandered from the ornate ceiling to the heavy drapes, taking in details that spoke of a world far removed from her daily experience. Lily nodded shyly, and Sarah signaled for a waiter. The server approached with visible reluctance, his polished appearance and practiced smile not quite masking his discomfort with the situation. His movements were stiff, performative, as if he were acting out a scene he found distasteful. Sarah ordered hot chocolate for Lily, coffee for Marcus, and a selection of sandwiches and pastries, her tone brooking no argument about their right to be served. She made her requests with the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard, even as she felt the weight of disapproving stares from other tables. As they waited, Lily's natural curiosity began to overcome her earlier fear. She studied the ornate ceiling with wonder, pointing out shapes in the decorative molding to her father. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the slight lisp of missing front teeth and the unlimited imagination of childhood, unencumbered by adult cynicism. "Daddy, look at all the pretty lights," she whispered, her earlier trembling subsiding in the warmth of the café. "They look like stars, but inside." Marcus's expression softened as he watched his daughter's recovery, the way wonder could triumph over fear when given the smallest opportunity. "They are beautiful, aren't they, little bird?" Almost as beautiful as the real stars we saw last weekend. Sarah felt her heart catch at the tenderness in his voice, the way he seemed to shield his child from the world's harsh edges with nothing but love and patience. She had assumed they were homeless, perhaps down on their luck, and struggling to survive in an unforgiving city. But there was something in Marcus's bearing, in the way he spoke and carried himself, that suggested depths she couldn't quite fathom. "I'm Sarah," she offered, extending her hand across the table with genuine warmth. "Marcus," he replied, his handshake firm and brief, but his eyes holding a gratitude that spoke volumes. "And this is my daughter, Lily." The little girl beamed at the introduction, her earlier shyness melting away like snow in spring sunshine. "I'm 7 3/4, she announced with the precision that only children found important. "And I want to be a pilot when I grow up. I draw airplanes all the time. Want to see?" Before anyone could respond, she had unzipped her backpack and pulled out a worn notebook filled with careful drawings of various aircraft. The pages showed remarkable detail for a child her age, with different types of planes rendered in colorful crayon and careful pencil lines. Sarah's smile was genuine as she leaned forward with interest, studying the artwork with the seriousness it deserved. "These are incredible, Lily. You're a real artist. What kind of airplanes are these?" Lily's face lit up like a sunrise, her enthusiasm infectious and pure. "That one's a Boeing 747, and this one's an Airbus 380. They're the really big ones that can fly all over the world. Daddy says maybe someday I can fly to Africa and see elephants, and to Japan to see the cherry blossoms." Marcus watched his daughter's animated explanation with quiet pride, his expression revealing the deep love of a father who believed in his child's dreams without reservation. "Lily knows more about aircraft specifications than most adults," he said softly. "She's been fascinated by flight since she could walk." The conversation continued, punctuated by the arrival of their order. Sarah watched as Marcus carefully tested the temperature of his daughter's hot chocolate, stirring in extra cream to cool it down. His movements were practiced, automatic, speaking of countless similar moments of quiet care and protection. Lily wrapped her small hands around the warm mug, sighing with contentment as the heat began to chase away the last of the cold that had settled in her bones. "This is the best hot chocolate ever," she declared with the absolute certainty that only children possessed. But their peaceful interlude was short-lived. The café's manager, a thin man with precisely groomed hair, and an expression that suggested he had spent years practicing looking down on others, approached their table with measured steps. His presence drew the attention of nearby diners, who leaned forward slightly to better observe the unfolding drama, their forks pausing halfway to their mouths. "I'm sorry," he said, though his tone suggested anything but regret, "but we've received complaints about the disruption your party has caused. I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately." Sarah's spine straightened, her journalist instincts recognizing injustice when she saw it played out in real time. "Complaints? From whom?" "We're sitting quietly, having a meal we paid for. What disruption could we possibly be causing?" The manager's smile was as cold as the winter wind outside, calculated to intimidate and dismiss. "Our other guests have expressed concern about security issues, inappropriate clientele. I'm sure a lady of your obvious intelligence can understand the position this puts us in." From nearby tables, Sarah could hear the low murmur of conversations, the quick scratch of phones being unlocked, the subtle sound of a society deciding who belonged and who didn't. A woman in designer clothes held her phone at an angle that clearly captured their table, her face displaying the particular satisfaction of someone witnessing others' misfortune while remaining safely removed from the consequences. Another patron, an older man in an expensive suit, made no effort to hide his disapproval, his voice carrying clearly across the dining room. "Honestly, the standards in this city have really declined. Next thing you know, they'll be letting anyone in." His companion, a woman whose jewelry caught the light like captured starfire, nodded in agreement. "It's uncomfortable, really. We come here to escape that sort of thing." Marcus began to rise, his movement calm but his jaw tight with controlled anger that spoke of years of similar experiences. "Come on, Lily. We should go." But Sarah remained seated, her hand gently touching his arm in a gesture that surprised them both. We haven't finished our meal, and I certainly haven't finished my coffee." She turned to the manager, her voice carrying clearly across the dining room with the kind of authority that came from years of asking hard questions and demanding honest answers. "If there's a security concern, please explain it to me in specific terms. Because from where I'm sitting, the only problem I see is your establishment's unwillingness to serve paying customers based on nothing more than their appearance." The tension in the café became palpable, settling over the elegant space like fog rolling in from the harbor. Conversations died mid-sentence as the confrontation escalated beyond polite whispers and into the realm of public accountability. The soft jazz playing in the background seemed suddenly intrusive, as if the musicians were unaware that their audience had found a different form of entertainment. Lily looked between the adults with growing confusion, her small hand reaching for her father's sleeve. "Daddy, why is the man angry? We're not being loud." It was then that Marcus's phone began to vibrate against his chest. He glanced at it once, then again, his expression shifting almost imperceptibly. Sarah noticed the change but couldn't read its meaning, couldn't understand why a simple phone call would cause such a subtle transformation in his demeanor. The device continued its insistent buzzing as the manager cleared his throat, clearly preparing to escalate the situation beyond mere requests. "Sir, if you don't leave voluntarily, I'll be forced to call the police," the manager announced, his voice rising just enough to ensure that every patron in the restaurant could hear. Trespassing charges can be quite serious. The threat hung in the air like smoke, carrying with it the implicit understanding that this confrontation had moved beyond simple discrimination into the realm of potential legal consequences. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, adrenaline flooding her system as she prepared for whatever might come next. Before anyone could speak, the cafe's front door chimed with the arrival of a new customer. A man in an impeccably tailored suit strode through the entrance, his movements carrying the kind of purposeful energy that spoke of important meetings and pressing deadlines. His presence commanded immediate attention, the kind of authority that came from years of making decisions that affected thousands of lives and millions of dollars. He spotted Marcus immediately, his gaze cutting across the dining room with the precision of a laser, and approached their table with quick, professional steps. Sarah noticed how the man's arrival seemed to shift the entire atmosphere of the room, conversations resuming in hushed, speculative tones as patrons tried to understand this new development. "Mr. Thompson," the newcomer said, his voice carrying the crisp authority of a longtime executive assistant who had learned to speak with his boss's voice when necessary. "I apologize for the interruption, but the board meeting has been moved up by 30 minutes. We need to prepare for the press conference regarding the new safety initiatives." The words hung in the air like a revelation waiting to unfold, each syllable carrying weight that Sarah couldn't yet comprehend. She felt the ground shift beneath her understanding as pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed began clicking into place with almost audible precision. The manager's face went through a remarkable transformation, color draining from his cheeks as recognition dawned like a sunrise he wished he could prevent. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for water, as the implications of the assistant's words penetrated his consciousness. Marcus Thompson. The name that appeared on business journals and news programs with increasing frequency. The CEO who had revolutionized airline safety protocols and turned a struggling carrier into one of the industry's most respected companies. The man whose face graced the covers of magazines celebrating innovative leadership and social responsibility, whose opinion on aviation matters was sought by government agencies and international aviation authorities. The same man who moments before had been denied service because of the color of his skin and the presumed poverty of his appearance. Sarah's mind raced as she processed this information, memories flooding back of articles she had read, news segments she had watched. Marcus Thompson, the youngest CEO in the aviation industry, known for his hands-on approach to leadership and his revolutionary safety protocols that had saved countless lives. The man who regularly testified before Congress on aviation matters, who had been featured on the cover of Time magazine just 3 months earlier. Marcus rose slowly, his movements carrying new weight as the room's perception of him shifted like sand in an hourglass. The transformation was almost visible, the way a room full of people suddenly realized they had been watching a performance whose script they had completely misunderstood. Lily looked up at her father with bright eyes, unaware of the seismic change occurring around them. To her, he had always been the most important person in the world, the man who read her bedtime stories and helped her with her airplane drawings and promised that dreams could come true if you worked hard enough. "Of course, David," Marcus replied to his assistant, his voice carrying the quiet authority Sarah now recognized as inherent rather than assumed. "We'll be right there. I just need to finish my coffee." He turned to the manager, whose hands had begun to tremble slightly as the full weight of his mistake became clear. "I believe you were asking us to leave?" The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the gentle clink of silverware against china, as the reality of the situation penetrated every corner of the café. Sarah watched as understanding rippled through the dining room like stones thrown into still water, each patron reassessing their assumptions and their role in what had just transpired. The manager stumbled over his words, apologies tumbling out in a desperate stream of attempted damage control. "Mr. Thompson, I had no idea, sir. Please, if I had known who you were, this would never have happened. Please, let me make this right." But Marcus held up a hand, and the man fell silent as if a switch had been thrown. The gesture was subtle but commanding, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to controlling boardrooms full of powerful people. "My daughter and I were simply trying to get warm," Marcus said, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent restaurant with the clarity of someone who knew how to make himself heard. "Miss Mitchell here was kind enough to help us when others chose to see only what they expected to see." He placed a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder, his touch protective and loving. "This is a teachable moment, little bird. Sometimes the world judges us before it knows us. But sometimes, someone like Miss Mitchell reminds us that kindness exists too." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, embarrassment and pride warring in her chest like competing storms. She had acted on instinct, moved by compassion for a child who seemed cold and afraid, never imagining that her small act of kindness would unfold into such a profound moment of social revelation. The revelation of Marcus's identity left her feeling both vindicated and somehow smaller, as if her good deed had been revealed as accidental rather than intentional. She had helped them not because of who Marcus was, but because of who they appeared to be, a father and daughter in need of warmth and human decency. But Marcus's expression, when he met her eyes, held nothing but genuine gratitude that seemed to transcend the circumstances of their meeting. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice carrying emotions that went far deeper than mere politeness. "Not for the meal, though we appreciate it, but for seeing my daughter as a child who needed warmth, not as a problem to be solved or avoided." David, the assistant, checked his watch with practiced discretion, his movements suggesting that important people were waiting and schedules needed to be maintained. "Sir, if we could make our way to the building, the media is already gathering for the press conference." Marcus nodded and began helping Lily back into her coat, his movements gentle and patient despite the obvious urgency of his professional obligations. The little girl, who had remained remarkably composed throughout the adult drama swirling around her, tugged on Sarah's sleeve with the directness that only children possessed. "Will you come see Daddy's airplane sometime?" she asked, her voice carrying the innocent hope of someone who believed that all the adults in her world were fundamentally good people. "It's really big, and it has my drawing on the pilot's door. Daddy had them put it there." Sarah's throat tightened with unexpected emotion, the simple request carrying more weight than any boardroom negotiation or corporate contract. "I would love that, sweetheart. Your drawings are beautiful." As they prepared to leave, Marcus pulled out his business card, the expensive cardstock thick between his fingers as he pressed it into Sarah's hand. The weight of it seemed to embody the evening's revelations. Solid proof that the world was far more complex than surface appearances suggested. "The press conference is in 1 hour," he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "If you'd like to attend, I'd be honored to have you there. This story, what happened here tonight, it's exactly what people need to hear." They walked together toward the exit, leaving behind a café full of people reassessing their assumptions and their actions. The manager followed at a respectful distance, still muttering apologies that fell on deaf ears. The security guards had mysteriously disappeared from their posts, their absence speaking volumes about the institutional cowardice that had created the situation in the first place. The woman who had been recording with her phone sat staring at her device, her earlier satisfaction replaced by the uncomfortable realization that she had been documenting her own participation in an act of injustice. Around the dining room, conversations resumed in hushed tones as patrons grappled with the implications of what they had witnessed. Outside, the December wind still cut through the street with merciless intensity, but somehow it felt less harsh, as if the warmth of human decency could provide protection against more than just physical cold. Marcus helped Lily into the back seat of a sleek black car that had appeared as if summoned by magic, its heated interior a stark contrast to the world they were leaving behind. Before closing the door, he turned back to Sarah, his expression thoughtful and somehow lighter than it had been when they first met. "You know," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years of similar experiences, "Lily asked me yesterday why people sometimes look at us the way they do. I didn't have a good answer then. But tonight, I can tell her that for every person who sees only what they expect, there's someone like you who sees what's actually there." The car pulled away, its taillights disappearing into the flow of Manhattan traffic, leaving Sarah standing on the sidewalk with the business card still warm in her hand. Around her, the city continued its relentless pace, millions of individual stories intersecting and diverging like a vast human symphony, but something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of justice, kindness, and the power of simple human decency. An hour later, she found herself in the lobby of Thompson Aerospace's headquarters, one of the gleaming towers that had formed the backdrop of their earlier encounter. The building's interior was a testament to modern corporate success, with soaring ceilings and abstract art that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. The press conference was already underway in the building's main auditorium, Marcus's voice carrying clearly through hidden speakers as he discussed new safety protocols and the company's commitment to equality in all its operations. Sarah took a seat in the back, watching as he commanded the room with the same quiet authority she had glimpsed in the café. But it was his closing remarks that would be replayed on news programs for weeks to come. His voice steady and clear as he addressed not just the assembled reporters but a watching world hungry for examples of authentic leadership. "Excellence in business requires excellence in character," he said, his words carrying the weight of lived experience and hard-won wisdom. "Tonight, my daughter and I experienced firsthand how quickly society can judge based on appearances alone. We also witnessed how one person's courage to act with kindness can illuminate the best of human nature." He paused, his gaze finding Sarah in the audience with unerring precision. To the young woman who simply said, "Let's get you warm. You reminded us that true leadership isn't about titles or corner offices. It's about seeing others as fully human and acting accordingly." The applause was thunderous, but Sarah barely heard it. She was thinking of Lily's bright eyes, of Marcus's quiet dignity, of the moment when a simple act of kindness had revealed the arbitrary nature of the barriers people constructed between themselves and others. Later, as she walked home through streets now glittering with fresh snow, each flake catching the light like tiny stars fallen to earth, Sarah carried with her more than just the memory of an extraordinary evening. She carried the knowledge that the world was full of Marcus Thompsons, people whose true worth lay hidden beneath surfaces that society was too quick to judge. The story would spread, as stories do in an age of instant communication. But for Sarah, the real impact wasn't in the headlines or the viral videos that would follow. It was in the understanding that compassion, offered freely and without expectation of reward, had the power to transform not just moments but the very fabric of human interaction. 6 months later, she would receive a drawing in the mail, carefully wrapped in brown paper and addressed in adult handwriting. It showed an airplane soaring through blue skies, with 2 figures visible in the cockpit window, a tall man and a small girl with pigtails. At the bottom, in careful 7-year-old handwriting that had grown more confident over the months, were the words, "Thank you for keeping us warm. Love, Lily, P.S. Daddy says you can visit any time." But that night, walking home through the falling snow with her footsteps echoing off silent buildings, Sarah simply smiled and pulled her coat tighter against the cold. In her pocket, the business card had long since been forgotten, replaced by something far more valuable. The knowledge that in a world often divided by fear and misunderstanding, warmth could still triumph over cold, kindness over cruelty, and love over indifference. The city glittered around her, full of countless stories waiting to unfold, countless opportunities for kindness to triumph over fear. And in a penthouse apartment not far away, a little girl fell asleep dreaming of airplanes while her father sat by her bedside, grateful for the reminder that heroes come in unexpected forms, offering warmth when the world grows cold, proving that sometimes the most profound moments happen not in boardrooms or press conferences, but in the simple human choice to see others as worthy of dignity and care.